hello to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this fireside chat. And yes, I really do wish we had a warm fire here, because where I'm coming from, it's pretty cold. So it's a great pleasure to host this session for the BCS. So I'm Ruby Kaur, a global solutions architect from Vodafone, and my guest is Jillian Moore, who is the global advisory lead for the consultancy Avanade. So Jillian, welcome. Welcome indeed to the fireside.
Oh, thank you. And if it helps, I do actually have my fire just behind me. So side. There you go.
Excellent, excellent. It's very, very warming. Okay, so just to remind everyone who joins this fireside chat, please do post your questions to us. We're going to be talking about many interesting things, including how and where do you acquire the skills to be an IT leader, amongst many other different subjects as well. So Jillian, let's begin by just taking you back just before the pandemic started. And it's true to say that many IT leaders were already going through a phenomenal amount of change, whether it was putting together a digital strategy, going cloud first, or transitioning towards agile or DevOps methodologies. There was a phenomenal amount of change and challenge already on the IT agenda. So my question to you, and I'd love to hear your views, are, since we are now in the pandemic, do you think that all of these challenges and changes have all been accelerated? And if so, do you think it's high time that IT leaders started to reinvent themselves? And in that case, what kind of skills do they now need to adopt?
Well, that was a lifetime ago. It doesn't feel like, when you ask me to think back to pre-pandemic, it doesn't feel like sort of 10 months ago. It feels like a different universe. I mean, even back then, when I was talking about digital transformation, I was talking about the world of continual change and the fact that organizations should only have one more transformation in them, which is the one to move to an organization that can cope with continual change. And I think that was as true before the pandemic as it is during it. I think it will continue, because I don't think that there will be a sudden end to this. It's going to be a continuous evolution, and we need to make sure that we preserve what's been good out of the pandemic as well as all the bad things. I'm talking in terms of ways of working and so on, and digital. I'm not talking about the world in general. So I think there's a lot of things that organizations have learned. I think what it has done is it's taken away that emotional barrier that people have to change, because when you've got something so fundamental and seismic going on, objecting to other changes around you goes away. There is no normal, so disruption is not a thing anymore. We're just used to it. So bringing in more changes to the way that we work and the way that we engage, the disruption's already there. So I think people have become more open and more accepting to it. So I think in that sense, there's been very much an acceleration of the change. I think a lot of what's happening would have happened anyway eventually. We've just got there a lot quicker. And that brings its own challenges, because human beings need time to get used to change, and nobody's had it. So I think we're going to get to a point where the pandemic stops being a thing and everybody kind of goes, okay, what now? Do we continue changing at this pace? Do we continue changing at a different pace? What do we do? And I think IT leaders need to start thinking about that, and kind of divorcing their thinking away from we're doing this because of the pandemic and turning it into just what are we doing because continuous change is the future, and that's the way it'll become sustainable. But I think it was always there. I think it's just got accelerated.
Great, great. And I guess the build on that is to look at the actual skills that the IT leaders now need to have. And it's interesting, in the report from the BCS, they talk about soft skills as being foremost. And my own take is that, of course, the hard skills will always need to be there. The technical skills, the visionary skills, the data-driven type of skills. But now I think we're starting to see the softer skills more come into the picture. I've heard leaders talk about authentic leadership now, actually being more honest and more open with their staff. And it also brings in this whole idea of IT leaders needing to be so much more better at showing compassion, showing that they really think about their staff and really care about their staff as well. Have you got any thoughts on that side of leadership.
I fully subscribe to that. It's not just IT leaders. I think it's anybody in any kind of leadership position. I mean, I changed jobs in the pandemic. I started my role at Avanade at the beginning of last May. I am in a very interesting position of running a global transformation program where I have never met 99.9% of the people who are affected, not in person. You know, I don't know what people look like from down here. Someone told me the other day they were 6'2", and I was blown away because I've only ever seen them in front of a screen. And it really, it does change things emotionally. You know, I'm trying to make these changes that affect people's lives hugely, and I'm doing them all at arm's length through the end of a screen. And then the other thing that I'm finding very hard is it's hard to get feedback on how those changes are impacting. So before, where I would wander around, meet a team, chat to some people in an office, just get a general vibe, there isn't any of that. My laptop is like a shutter that opens and closes on what's happening in the universe that I'm trying to change. And it's really hard to get that feedback. So I think, again, talking about good things that have come out of this pandemic, I think the awareness and the focus on that side of things, how humans are affected by change, what it means to be an employee, the openness now about talking about mental health and the way that people are coping, what it feels like, all of a sudden it's acceptable. And it was really quite a difficult subject before. And I think that's something else that we need to hold on to as we go forwards, because back to that world of continual change, it's all about how the human being copes with it. The technology now is kind of the easy part. You know, we've shown that we can, I mean, Avanade did it, deploy 1 million people onto Teams in a week or so, or whatever. You know, the technology is not so much the challenge anymore. It's really helping people cope with it and engage with it and actually thrive and be inspired by it. And I was reading something the other day as well about how one of the themes that's come out of this pandemic is people taking tools and developing them beyond the thought of the people who originated them. So, for example, all the people who are trading on Wall Street in their own little groups and so on, they're taking platforms that already existed and they're creating new ways to use them. And we need to take that into the world of work and our employees as well. You've got to recognize that people in their lives have now got used to having this kind of control and developing digital solutions further. How do you help them do that? How do you make the most of that rather than the organization getting in the way?
That's so true. In fact, I'm reminded of a quote, I think it was from Klaus Schwab, who's the chairman of the World Economic Forum. And I think he said something like, since the pandemic, it's now the opportunity to reimagine, reflect, and reset the world. So there are going to be those big changes that are going to happen because of the pandemic, and hopefully all for the better, the changes will happen. But it's interesting what you're saying about now technology is coming into the hands of lots of people. All of a sudden, it's fair to say that technology is suddenly center stage since the pandemic. We're all having to adapt to using new tools, new ways of communicating, and how to use those tools and how to communicate is very, very important as well. And I think not just from a user point of view, technology is so important from business continuity. We've noticed that those organizations that had already started their pathway towards digital transformation have been most successful here. And remote working really features in the report as well. It's one of those high priorities that many IT leaders will now start to look at. If they hadn't done it before, they're certainly going to be looking at it now. But remote working has also become the de facto survival kit as well for businesses. And as you touched on earlier, home working is not easy. Mental health is one of those side effects that's starting to happen as well. So I would like to ask you and get your views on what do you think IT leaders can do to help with well-being and the mental health of their IT staff at this moment in time?
I think the first thing is a lot of role modeling. So as a leader, think about your own mental health, think about what you need to do, because everybody's challenged by it. It's not just the teams, the leaders get it as well. And role model, understand boundaries, understand your own boundaries, be transparent about them, take the time out. I'm very transparent with my teams about the fact that I will find time in my day to go out for a walk for half an hour and grab a coffee. I will stop. I'll walk away from my emails And it's got to be just as acceptable as other reasons. You have to kind of get past that, oh, I've got to churn through all the time. But it's not just that I've learned that, it's that I can actually share that with others and demonstrate it. I have to be very good about where I set boundaries. I mean, again, I've got a global role. I could work 24 hours a day if I let myself. I have to get very good about setting boundaries and not sending emails at night to other people because it generates work for others. So I think there's something very much as a leader about actually not just saying to people, I care about your mental health and you know, I want to make this work for you, but actually demonstrate it and be open about it and transparent about it. And that brings in an interesting topic around vulnerability, which I was slightly obsessed with vulnerability in the workplace before all this happened, and now it's just become huge, because I think there's something that as leaders we have to help everybody understand that this is normal and that our expectations are different, and help people get used to that so that they can feel that they have that control. And the best way to do that is through role modeling and demonstrating it.
Oops, sorry, lost the mute button then. Okay, but that's an excellent answer. In fact, I know from my own company, the things that we're doing, it is very much about showing that vulnerability and also setting up sessions where you can actually talk about your vulnerabilities with your line managers and being very frank and very honest about things. And I came across an interesting term which I haven't heard in a long time. It's all about self-compassion. Actually taking time and actually thinking, how do I feel about the situation? Am I going through too much? So self-compassion and self-kindness is another thing that all employees are looking at this moment in time. But just following on from the people focus, which is so important here, I often see IT leaders as needing to be culture catalysts, because it's a new culture that needs to come into the workforce to say it's okay to be not okay, to want to work in a different way because you've got homeschooling or elder care to look after. And I guess organizations are there to give a sense of belonging and psychological safety to their employees. And it's all of that kind of different avenues that need to come together. And I guess IT leaders, in the end, they need to foster greater inclusion and greater diversity. So just on the question about diversity, it's so big and it's so important. Would you just like to give me your views on how IT leaders can build that greater sense of cohesion and diversity in the workplace?
Well, I think remote working is it's another good thing to come out of this. It has the opportunity to be a great leveler when it comes to diversity. So you know, I won't sugarcoat it. The IT industry, I've been in it for 20 odd years. It has not always been the most diverse industry. It has a tradition for being run in, you know, deals are done down the pub. There's a lot of drinking, alcohol, team meetings. You know, there's a certain culture that comes with it. Networking has always been very kind of social. Dare I mention golf courses, that kind of thing. You know, I'm stereotyping, but there's this essence of culture in the IT world, which is not that inclusive as a culture. And what remote working and COVID has done is it's forcing a revolution in the industry. You know, how we do sales, how we network is different. That kind of like, hey, we met down the golf course, we had a chat and we did a deal. It can't happen anymore, literally. You know, we have to be, and it's introducing this concept of conscious networking, which is way more inclusive because it means everybody is leaning in a more kind of equal way. So I think very kind of remote working in itself is a great leveler, and it's being much more inclusive. You know, and I remember some work before I joined Avanade. I worked at Atos, and we had an amazing team there who worked on accessibility in digital. And I remember the leader of accessibility there telling me about how remote working then was actually a choice for quite a lot of people with certain disabilities because it was a great leveler in terms of communicating with people. You know, some people who had autism or things like that, it was better for them to connect remotely. All of that difference is now gone. We're all having to do this in the same way. So I think there's a real opportunity here. And again, back to what can we learn now that is good that we should keep? You know, these good parts about remote working, these good disciplines about being levelers, you know, the fact that everybody has different challenges, but everybody has challenges. we need to keep that. And so I'm actually talking inclusion and diversity are different things. You know, diversity is about very real problems that come from different groups of society and how they're affected or not. Inclusion is about everybody having something to say and being part of what's going on. And I think digital working is a great leveler for inclusion, but there are still issues to do with diversity that need to be addressed, and we'll always need particular programs.
Absolutely. And I think even just talking about it and bringing this to a forum such as this, so IT leaders are aware that diversity and inclusion are so important. And I think they do focus in the report as well as being quite important to employees as well as everyone around in the business. And IT leaders, you're absolutely correct. I've been in the industry for about 20 years and I've always been the only female architect in the room. But, you know, I wish that would change, and I'm going to do my utmost best for what I can do to make that change just by having those conversations. And we bring so much that's different. So diversity is a fantastic thing. Diversity of opinions, diversity of thought, all goes together to perform and bring about wonderful solutions, I've always thought. Yeah. Just changing tack slightly. Career paths and talent management is always very interesting to me, because now I start to work with lots of people who didn't follow the pure IT path and came from different subjects. And I don't really see that in IT leaders often. And I'd love to get your views if you think that in your experience that IT leaders that came from pure IT backgrounds make the best IT leaders.
So I always find it very weird these days when people call me a woman in tech, because that's not how I see myself in my head, because I've always worked on the kind of, well, for a long time worked on the kind of people and human use of tech side of things. Even though I have a computer science degree and, you know, I actually have a very technical background, I look at my career and I think I don't think I've ever used a single item of all of that tech education during my career in an IT world and being a woman in tech. Particularly working in the spaces of things like customer experience and employee experience and change and transformation and business, all that kind of thing. What's really important is how you relate digital to how people use it. And so I think it's just as valid and sometimes even more so to have backgrounds in all kinds of things like psychology and human studies and so on. And in fact, I'm actually doing a lot of work now in our teams at Avanade to look at how we bring more people in with different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds. So actually mixing people who've got an IT background with a non-IT background, because I think it just brings a fresher way to look at things. And I would say, don't be afraid to bring people in. If they're very good at problem solving, they're very good at analysing situations, they're very good at matching how people do things with how IT works, then there's a huge value in combining people like that with perhaps your more traditional techie. And, you know, again, let's change the image of what working in tech is. Yeah. It's a very varied place, but it still has this reputation for being quite singular and black and white.
Yeah, I'd very much agree with that. In fact, the best leaders I knew were people who came from the humanities and the tech background as well, that combined too. Just a final question. I think we've got time for one more, and I want to look at the next generation of IT leaders. Now, it's fair to say that they will inherit a very disruptive world, whether it's techno, geopolitical, social upheaval the world is going through, whether it's climate change, Black Lives Matter for better inclusion, AI, the fear of robots, etc., or tech for good as well. So what last piece of advice would you give, Jillian, to anyone who is an aspiring next generation IT leader?
Wow. Expect change and be good at problem solving. I used to, well, I still do a lot of mentoring for people, but years ago when I was mentoring people, the question was always, you know, what role do you want? What do you see around you that's the role you want in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? I can't ask people that question anymore, because the role that they'll be doing in 2 years' time doesn't exist now. The role that I do now didn't exist 5 years ago. So I don't think you can plan a career in the same way as you did when I started, even when I started in this industry. I think it's much more about be good at problem solving, be good at spotting opportunities to learn and do something different and grow. Be aware of this concept of reinventing yourself every few years actually being a good thing, and get comfortable with it, and just expect that on the path. But I was reading the Davos report this week. You mentioned the World Economic Forum. Not only we did have 7 generations in the workplace, now we have 8, because we have the newly christened pandemials, which is the 15 to 24-year-olds who are being affected now, because that's going to change again, entry into work and so on. So, what we thought even before this is going to be different again about how people want to work. So for me, it's like, go with the flow, look for the opportunities, be prepared to reinvent, be prepared to problem solve.
Brilliant. I think that's a nice way of bringing us back to the start again. Absolutely. Always reinvent yourselves to survive in the IT business. Brilliant. Thank you, Jillian. Been a pleasure talking to you.